Michael Grimes was last seen at Ken's wrecking yard, located on U.S. Highway 59 North in Nacogdoches, Texas, on January 18, 1999. His disappearance remains unsolved to this day, and he has never been heard from again. At the time of his vanishing, Grimes was working as an informant for the East Texas Drug Task Force, a role that raised concerns about his safety and the possibility of foul play being involved. Authorities initially considered the idea that Grimes's work as an informant could have made him a target, but they eventually discounted this theory. Years passed without significant developments, and the case appeared to stall until March 2006, when Rodney Wayne Searley was charged with murder in connection with Grimes's disappearance. Searley was the last person known to have been with Grimes before he vanished, and Ken's wrecking yard, where Grimes was last seen, is owned by Searley's parents, adding another layer of intrigue to the case. A photograph of Searley was released in connection with the case, sparking renewed interest in the investigation. During his December 2007 trial, Searley took the stand and admitted to killing Grimes but claimed it was an act of self-defense. According to Searley's testimony, he stabbed Grimes to death and then buried his body in a wooded area. He explained that he did not report the killing to the authorities because he believed no one would believe his story. The trial also saw testimony from Grimes's ex-wife, who stated that her former husband had a violent temper, particularly when under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and that he had physically abused her on several occasions. Despite this, 3 other witnesses testified that Searley had confessed to them that he had murdered Grimes. Ultimately, Searley was convicted of the murder of Michael Grimes, but his body was never found, leaving many questions unanswered. Following his conviction, Searley could have faced a range of sentences, from probation to life in prison. Instead, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. After the trial, Grimes's family members made public pleas, urging Searley to reveal the location of their loved one's body, but to no avail. The suspicion of foul play surrounding Grimes's disappearance has never fully dissipated, and the unresolved mystery continues to haunt those who knew him. Ruben Herrera was last seen on April 7, 1983, in El Paso, Texas. He left home to walk to Eastwood Knolls Elementary School, but never arrived. His mother reported him missing when he didn't come home from school. A friend later believed they saw him running towards McRae Street around 5:30 p.m. Ruben's maternal uncle, Miguel Zaragoza, lived in Juarez, Mexico in 1983 and was a wealthy businessman. That afternoon, Zaragoza received a call from a man who spoke in Spanish and used family nicknames, stating, "The boy is all right." The caller demanded a $300,000 ransom for Ruben's return and instructed Zaragoza to deliver the money to a Denny's restaurant in El Paso. At 9 p.m., Zaragoza went to the restaurant but did not make contact with anyone. The family then contacted the police. 2 days later, another call came to Zaragoza's office, stating Ruben was in Juarez. Zaragoza was told to go to 2 pay-phone booths and await further instructions. The call was traced to a pay-phone at the Revco drugstore in the 6100 block of North Mesa. When FBI agents arrived, they found Raymond Henry Acosta, Ruben's stepfather's brother, talking on the phone. Acosta had an outstanding warrant for a bank larceny charge from California. Upon searching his car, agents found a map with instructions to leave the ransom money in a cement pipe at Quail Hollow Shopping Center. Acosta, who had refused to cooperate, claimed that Ruben was dead and that he had taken the child to Mexico in his car, a 1977 Cadillac Seville. Despite this, Acosta refused to disclose the location of Ruben's body or the identities of any co-conspirators, citing fear of retaliation. Ruben's mother later recalled an incident 2 weeks before her son's disappearance when someone attempted to abduct her elderly mother. She suspected Acosta was behind this, but no charges were ever filed. Acosta was arrested and in July 1983 pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit kidnapping, receiving a sentence of 30 years to life. In January 1984, Mario Javier Martinez, a former ambulance service owner in El Paso, was arrested for attempting to extort a $500,000 ransom from Zaragoza. However, he was released due to lack of evidence, and his arrest did not lead to further breakthroughs in Ruben's case. Acosta died in prison in 2012. Before his death, he was questioned again but offered no further information about the kidnapping. Authorities ruled out Ruben's family members as suspects in the abduction. In May 2013, a man in South America claimed to be Ruben and contacted the Fundación Papa por Siempre organization. This individual, who said he was indigent, expressed a desire to remain anonymous and requested Ruben's social security number. His identity has not been verified, and it remains unclear whether he is indeed Ruben. Foul play is suspected in Ruben's case, and it remains unsolved. Ruben's mother has passed away, but his stepfather and sisters are still alive and continue to seek answers. Marisol Hernandez was last seen at approximately 8:30 a.m. on January 16, 2004, when she dropped her toddler daughter off at the Advanced Head Start Child Care Center on Acme Castroville Road in San Antonio, Texas. She planned to meet the father of her children to discuss child support payments, but she never arrived at the meeting. Later, her car, a Hunter Green 1996 Ford Mustang with Texas license plate number F19SBT, was found abandoned at a strip mall located in the 4800 block of West Commerce Street, near General McMullen Drive, on the west side of San Antonio. No sign of Marisol was found at the scene, and there were no indications of foul play. The strip mall was only about a mile from her apartment, but loved ones say she did not frequent that area. At the time of her disappearance, Marisol was involved in a custody battle. The father of her oldest son was attempting to gain full custody of him. She had 3 children, who are now living with her parents. The father of her 2 younger children, who had been in a relationship with her at the time, has maintained his innocence but has refused to take a lie detector test in connection with her disappearance. The father of her older son was still seeking custody of him. Foul play is suspected in Marisol's case. She had told her mother that if she did not return from her appointment, it was because she had been murdered. Despite ongoing efforts, her case remains unsolved. Some sources indicate that Marisol was last seen leaving her home on Rivas Street, although the details of her whereabouts are unclear. Unah Harris, a special education teacher from Fort Worth, Texas, disappeared on June 15, 2021. At around 3 a.m., he called his mother and told her that he was outside walking his dog, which struck her as odd because of the early hour, but she didn't notice anything else unusual during their conversation. Later, at 4 a.m., he attempted to call her again, but she missed the call. When she tried calling him back at 7:45 a.m., he didn't answer, and subsequent calls went straight to voicemail. He continued to post on his Facebook page throughout the day, but by the next day, he had vanished without a trace. On June 16th, Harris's blue 2020 GMC pickup truck was discovered abandoned at a stoplight on US 83, south of Aspermont, Texas, about 3 hours away from Fort Worth. The truck was operable, with his keys and wallet left inside. 2 witnesses reported seeing a black male exit the truck at 9 a.m. and walk southbound, accompanied by 2 dogs. Despite this crucial information, the police returned the vehicle to Harris's family without processing it for evidence. The fate of Harris's dogs also added a grim detail to the case. They were later found dead near where the truck had been abandoned. The last known ping from Harris's cell phone was recorded on June 17th in the Unah, Texas area. Following his disappearance, a suitcase belonging to Harris was discovered lying undamaged on the side of the road in Paducah, Texas. Further unsettling developments included his Facebook account being accessed on August 3rd, nearly 6 weeks after his disappearance. His mother noticed that the password had been changed, and the computer used to log into the account was traced to Corpus Christi, Texas. It remains unclear whether this is related to his disappearance, and the identity of the person who changed the password has not been determined. The circumstances surrounding Unah Harris's disappearance are mysterious, and his case remains unsolved. The combination of unexplained sightings, strange phone activity, and the discovery of his abandoned truck and dead dogs have led investigators to consider the possibility of foul play. Christian Hall was last seen in Corpus Christi, Texas, on November 24, 2005. He left his home with a man named David Todd Andrews, who was 39 years old at the time, on a 74-foot boat called the Gypsy 2. The two were reportedly seen together on the boat while it was off the coast of Louisiana in the Gulf of Mexico. The Gypsy 2 was reportedly taking on water during this time, but both Andrews and Christian declined help from a nearby civilian boater. After that, neither Christian, Andrews, nor the boat have been seen again. Andrews, whose nickname is Captain Dusty, was born on June 8, 1966, and is described as a Caucasian male, standing 5 feet 11 inches tall, weighing around 200 pounds, with brown hair and hazel eyes. Authorities believe that Christian left of his own free will with Andrews, although Andrews falsely claimed that Christian was his son. Christian's mother, however, did not approve of her son's decision to leave with Andrews on the boat trip. She did not report him as a missing person until January 4, 2006, 6 weeks after he had left home. Christian's disappearance remains unsolved, with authorities still working to piece together the details of the case. Dustin Henderson was last seen at his apartment in the 400 block of Highland Cross in Houston, Texas, on October 24, 2023. Henderson had recently moved to Houston from Los Angeles, California, for work and kept in frequent contact with his mother, Lawana Shaw, calling her multiple times a day. On the evening of his disappearance, Henderson spoke to Shaw at 9:19 p.m., mentioning that a friend was with him at the apartment. Shaw asked him to call back later, but he never did. 2 days later, on October 26th, the friend contacted Shaw and expressed concern, saying that he had not heard from Henderson. The friend also sent Shaw photos of the inside of Henderson's apartment. When Shaw asked what he was doing there, the friend admitted that he had lied to the apartment management, claiming to be Henderson's brother in order to gain access to the apartment. Henderson had previously told Shaw that he was uncomfortable with this particular friend having access to his apartment. The friend was in possession of Henderson's work phone, laptop, and other personal belongings when he spoke to Shaw. Several months after Henderson's disappearance, his car was found abandoned less than a mile from his apartment. Unfortunately, the discovery of the vehicle did not lead to any significant breakthroughs in the case. Inside the car, investigators found a Hilton Hotel key card with a checkout date for the same day Henderson went missing, but video footage from the hotel was no longer available due to the time that had passed. In August 2024, nearly 10 months after Henderson's disappearance, Karen Miles, a 61-year-old woman from Missouri City, Texas, went missing. Her SUV was stolen, and a few days later, Devontae Clark, a man who had been friends with Henderson, was arrested while driving Miles's stolen vehicle in Pearland, Texas. He had altered the vehicle's license plate to change its number. Miles's skeletal remains were found behind a church in a heavily wooded area, and she had been shot to death. Clark was charged with capital murder in her case, as investigators believed he killed her in order to steal her car. At the same time, Clark was named as a person of interest in Henderson's disappearance. When Henderson's family reached out to Clark during their search for him, Clark denied having seen Henderson. Clark had also sometimes stayed in the parking lot of Miles's apartment complex, where he and his girlfriend, who were homeless, often spent the night in their car. Despite the connection between Clark and Henderson, no charges have been filed against Clark in relation to Henderson's disappearance. However, Shaw believes that her son is dead, especially after a conversation Henderson had with her shortly before his disappearance. He mentioned that he had an Apple Tag, a device used for location tracking, in his car, and said someone had gone too far. While authorities have not found conclusive evidence of foul play in Henderson's case, Shaw continues to advocate for answers, even as she undergoes treatment for lung cancer. Henderson's disappearance remains unsolved. Unah Herd was last seen in Sherman, Texas, on June 25, 2006, when she left her home in the 1200 block of Harrison during the early morning hours to go for a walk. She was last spotted 5 blocks from her home, in the area of Old Settlers Park. She never returned home and has not been heard from since. Herd had plans to meet her great-granddaughter for breakfast at the Whataburger restaurant at 9 a.m., a routine they had followed for 10 years. However, she never showed up for their scheduled meal. Her great-granddaughter reported her missing at 10 a.m. when she failed to arrive. When police arrived, they found that Herd had left behind all of her personal belongings, including her wallet and driver's license. A cup of coffee, the morning newspaper, and her purse were discovered on her kitchen table. Her car remained parked in the garage, and the burglar alarm had been turned off. Initially, her house key was believed to be missing, but it was later found in a flower pot near the back door when her family cleaned out the house in 2007. Herd had lived in the same house since 1976, and her husband had passed away 14 years prior to her disappearance. She was known for maintaining a regular schedule, including her morning walks and breakfast with her great-granddaughter. A year after her disappearance, her family had her declared legally dead. Foul play is suspected in her case due to the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Despite extensive efforts to locate her, the case remains unsolved. Todd Harman, a Florida resident in 2001, was visiting her family in Texas during the summer and planned to purchase property in the state to be closer to them. On July 12, 2001, she mapped out a route from League City to Corpus Christi, Texas, intending to search for potential homes along Highway 35. Harriman left her son's residence near League City around 5 a.m. that morning in her rose quartz 1995 Lincoln Continental. A photo of her vehicle is included with the case summary. At approximately 8:30 a.m., one of Harriman's friends attempted to call her on her cellular phone. The phone rang 4 times before the call was redirected to her voicemail, indicating her phone was still on. The same friend tried to reach her again at 10:30 a.m., but this time, the call went directly to voicemail, indicating that her phone had been turned off. By the evening of July 12th, Harriman had not contacted anyone, which prompted her children to become concerned. One of her sons contacted the friend Harriman had planned to stay with that night and learned that she had never arrived as scheduled. Shortly thereafter, her family reported her as a missing person. Harriman's vehicle, a rose quartz Lincoln Continental with a white leather interior, chrome tailpipes, and a small PJC sticker on the right side of the rear bumper, has never been found. The car also had personalized Florida license plates with the nickname Totsie and a vehicle identification number of 1LNLM97V35 Y755926. Extensive searches of the area between League City and Corpus Christi yielded no evidence regarding her whereabouts, and few clues have surfaced in her case. Some unconfirmed sightings of Harriman in Texas and Florida were reported shortly after her disappearance. A sketch of a possible suspect in her disappearance has been circulated. The individual is described as an African-American male in his 20s with a slim build. He was reportedly seen driving in the Houston area on the day Harriman vanished, though authorities have not determined if he is connected to her case. Harriman's background includes living in Vietnam, where she married Clinton Howard Harriman II, who was serving with the United States Merchant Marines. After returning to America with their young daughter, she stayed behind in Vietnam with her oldest son from a previous marriage. Eventually, she escaped Vietnam and reunited with her husband in the United States. The Harrimans had 3 children together. Clinton Howard Harriman II passed away from cancer in 1993, and it is Harriman's children who are now leading the search for her. Authorities suspect foul play in her disappearance, which remains unsolved. Stephanie Henderson was last seen in Levelland, Texas, on November 28, 1993, after an argument with her husband, Ricky Don Henderson, at their home on Opdyke West. She called her grandmother that day, asking her to pick her up and take her to San Angelo, Texas. However, by the time her grandmother arrived, Stephanie had already disappeared. Ricky claimed that she had been picked up by female friends from Hobbs, New Mexico, and that he did not know where she was. She has never been heard from again. Stephanie left behind all of her personal belongings, including her purse and the only pair of shoes she owned, which suggested that she did not leave willingly. Her disappearance was not immediately reported as her family believed she was simply staying with friends in New Mexico. However, a typed letter later arrived, supposedly from Stephanie, stating she was living in Hobbs. The letter, however, was postmarked from Lubbock, Texas, which raised suspicions in Stephanie's grandmother. Upon further investigation, the friends who allegedly picked her up in Hobbs denied ever having done so. Foul play is suspected due to the unusual circumstances surrounding her disappearance. In 2004, police tested a hair sample from the envelope of the letter sent to her grandmother. The saliva on the envelope flap did not match Stephanie's DNA and was identified as coming from a male. Despite this lead, Stephanie's whereabouts remained unknown. In March 2021, Ricky Don Henderson was indicted for the murder of his wife, Stephanie. At the time, he was serving a 25-year sentence for a separate drug-related case. However, in May 2024, the murder charge was dismissed when the prosecution determined that there was insufficient evidence to convict him. While charges could potentially be refiled if more evidence emerges, Ricky has also been named a person of interest in the 2018 murder of 20-year-old Jeannie Quinn in Levelland, Texas. He was the last person to see Quinn before she disappeared, and her body was discovered in a wooded lot in Abilene, Texas, 2 days later. The autopsy revealed that Quinn's hanging was staged, and she had been murdered. Ricky has not been charged in her case either. Stephanie's case remains unsolved, with foul play strongly suspected. Her body has never been found. Kathy Haskell was last seen on the night of October 16, 2003, between 10 o'clock and 10:30 p.m., at her residence in the 14,000 block of Coquina Bay Avenue in Corpus Christi, Texas. She had confided in her husband, Andy Young Run 1, expressing stress over their finances and her weight, and said she was leaving the home to unwind. One stayed home to watch their children. However, Haskell was never heard from again. The following day, Haskell's burgundy 1996 Dodge Caravan was discovered abandoned on a beach south of Bob Hall Pier, near the intersection of State Highway 361 and Gulf Beach Road in Corpus Christi. Her purse, medication, and keys were found locked inside the vehicle, but there were no footprints in the sand around the parked car. One credit card was missing from her purse, but no charges had been made on it, and when canceled the account after learning of her disappearance. He reported her missing after finding her car. Haskell's husband, One, had filed for divorce from her on May 6, 2003, 5 months before her disappearance, but withdrew the filing just 10 days later. However, 2 weeks after Haskell vanished, he filed for divorce again and also sought a restraining order to prevent her from returning and taking their son. In court documents, when stated that he believed Haskell had left him for another man and had been associating with unsavory individuals, including prostitutes, strippers, and drug addicts, at the time of her disappearance. While one claimed that police had concluded Haskell had been having an affair and left voluntarily, investigators publicly denied this, stating that they had no evidence suggesting she had left town with anyone. They also indicated that there was no evidence of suicide, even though Haskell had been receiving treatment for depression at the time. Given that her car was found abandoned, authorities are treating her disappearance as suspicious. An extensive search of the beach area, where Haskell's vehicle was found, yielded no clues to her whereabouts. The circumstances of her disappearance remain unclear, and her case remains unsolved. Katherine Hamill was last seen on March 23, 1998, after leaving her job at 24 Hour Fitness in Houston, Texas. A coworker dropped her off at her apartment in the 1200 block of Wilcrest at around 2 p.m. 1 hour later, her boyfriend arrived at the apartment and saw her. But by the time he left around 6 o'clock p.m., Hamill had disappeared. She has never been heard from again. At the time, Hamill was also working part-time at Nick's Sports Bar and Grill in Houston. The night before her disappearance, on March 22nd, Hamill had an argument with a man named Jose Arenales at the restaurant, though it's unclear if this incident is connected to her disappearance. Authorities believe Hamill did not leave voluntarily, as she was very attached to her daughter, and it would have been out of character for her to abandon the child. While her relationship with her boyfriend, the father of her daughter, was described as rocky, he has not been charged in connection with her case. In 2006, Hamill's mother held a memorial service for her daughter, which marked the 8th anniversary of her disappearance. Despite ongoing investigations, Hamill's case remains unsolved. On Valentine's Day in 1986, at precisely 10:06 a.m., a devastating event unfolded in a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Houston, Texas. Marilu Jerry, a 33-year-old affluent resident, was found gravely wounded in her own home. She had been shot 4 times and was rushed to the hospital, but despite the paramedics' efforts, she succumbed to her injuries shortly after arrival. The horrific incident shattered the lives of those who knew her, and in the wake of her death, questions and suspicions arose, primarily directed at her husband, Stephen Jerry. While Stephen vehemently denies any involvement, citing a minute-by-minute alibi for the morning of the murder, Marilu's parents remain steadfast in their belief that he is responsible. The events of that tragic morning began with a phone call. At 8:15 a.m., Stephen Jerry contacted his mother-in-law, Marilu Sado, asking her to visit the Jerry home to assist Marilu in preparing for a lunchtime party they were hosting. After the call, Maria attempted to reach Marilu directly but received no answer. Concerned by the lack of response, Maria decided to head over to the Jerry residence herself. Upon her arrival, she first knocked on the back door and, receiving no reply, moved to the front door. To her surprise and growing alarm, she found the front door slightly ajar, an unusual occurrence, as Marilu was known to keep the door locked. Maria's unease turned to horror as she entered the home and discovered her daughter lying in the bedroom. The sight of Marilu's lifeless body confirmed her worst fears. Her daughter was dead. At 10:30 a.m., paramedics arrived and made a final attempt to revive Marilu by administering a direct injection to her heart. However, it was already too late. The attempt to restart her heart further complicated the investigation by making it impossible to determine an exact time of death. Authorities concluded that Marilu had been shot 4 times with 2 different firearms, a .380 caliber and a .22 caliber pistol. Despite the violent scene, investigators found no signs of a break-in, nor were any weapons recovered from the house. Inside the bedroom, Marilu's jewelry box was open, suggesting that she had been in the process of selecting jewelry to wear when the attack occurred. However, her family was adamant that robbery was not the motive, as expensive items remained untouched. This belief starkly contrasted with Stephen's account. He claimed that several valuable items, including $25,000 to $40,000 worth of jewelry and fur coats, had been stolen. The discrepancy in their statements further deepened the mystery surrounding the case. Marilu and Stephen had been married for 3 years, during which they presented an image of a prosperous and enviable lifestyle. They traveled to exotic destinations like Hawaii and Europe and appeared to be living a life of luxury. Stephen, an insurance agent by profession, described their marriage as exciting and fulfilling. However, Marilu's family painted a drastically different picture. According to her mother, Marilu Sado, the marriage was anything but blissful. She recounted that Marilu had spent the last 2 years of her marriage in a state of emotional distress, frequently crying about her relationship with Stephen. Financial disputes were a constant source of tension between the couple, and the Jerry family's affluent facade masked deeper marital troubles. Given the circumstances and Stephen's proximity to the victim, law enforcement officials naturally considered him a primary suspect. Police requested access to Stephen's personal firearms to determine whether they had been used in the crime. Ballistic tests ultimately cleared his guns as the murder weapons, but suspicions persisted. Stephen provided police with a detailed account of his whereabouts on the morning of Marilu's murder, claiming he had an ironclad alibi. According to him, he deviated from his usual routine that day. Instead of working from home, as he typically did in the early mornings, he left the house around 6:25 or 6:30 a.m., with Marilu still asleep in bed. His first stop was a local 7-Eleven store, where he picked up a cup of coffee. He then proceeded to the post office to collect the mail before heading to a nearby donut shop. Following that, he visited a local business, Precision Glass, where he engaged in a brief conversation with the owner, Don Richardson. It was at this location at approximately 7:30 a.m. that he remembered he had not yet called Marilu as promised. He used the receptionist's phone to call her, and according to Stephen, Marilu sounded busy and was preparing for the lunchtime gathering. From 7:30 a.m. until the discovery of Marilu's body at 10:06 a.m., Stephen was reportedly in the company of various witnesses who corroborated his movements. However, Marilu's family was not convinced of his innocence. They hired private investigator Bill Elliott to scrutinize Stephen's alibi. Elliott's investigation raised several red flags. Witnesses interviewed by Elliott noted that Stephen typically did not leave his home until 9 or 10 a.m., making his early departure on the morning of the murder highly suspicious. Additionally, Elliott discovered that Stephen's first stop that morning was only 2 blocks away from the Jerry residence. Despite the short distance, Stephen did not arrive at his destination until nearly 7 a.m., almost 30 minutes after leaving home. This unexplained time gap led Elliott to theorize that Stephen had used this time to dispose of incriminating evidence. Adding to the suspicion, Stephen's behavior the day after the murder struck many as peculiar. He revisited all the locations he had been to on the morning of the crime and reminded witnesses that he had been there the previous day. Reports also indicated that he requested receipts from these establishments, including the donut shop, seemingly in an effort to solidify his alibi. Unfortunately, the investigation into Marilu's murder was further complicated by the uncertainty surrounding her exact time of death. The paramedics' resuscitation efforts rendered it nearly impossible to pinpoint when she had died, thereby making it difficult for insurance investigators to verify the validity of Stephen's alibi. In the 2 years leading up to Marilu's murder, Stephen had taken out substantial life insurance policies for both himself and his wife. Each policy was valued at $435,000. Private investigator Elliott discovered that Stephen, despite his outward appearance of affluence, had significant financial troubles. His penchant for the high life exceeded his income, and he reportedly had over $125,000 in hard cash judgments against him. This financial strain led many to suspect that Marilu's murder was financially motivated, with Stephen standing to gain a substantial payout from the life insurance policy. 10 months after Marilu's murder, Stephen sought to collect the $435,000 life insurance payout. Outraged, Marilu's parents took legal action to block the claim, arguing that Stephen was responsible for her death. They aimed to prove his culpability in court. Stephen, for his part, countered that the Serados were after the insurance money for themselves. The legal battle culminated in an out-of-court settlement just as the trial was about to commence. The details of the settlement remain unclear, as the presiding judge sealed the court records for 2 years. Both parties accused the other of initiating the settlement. In the aftermath of Marilu's burial, her grave became a target of vandalism. Her headstone was smeared with mud and eventually stolen. It was later replaced with a new marker bearing her maiden name, Marilu Sado. The grieving Sado family continues to seek justice for Marilu, holding out hope that the case will one day be resolved. Meanwhile, Stephen Jerry remains a person of interest in the investigation. The conflicting reports about the crime scene, whether valuable items were stolen or untouched, only add to the uncertainty. Investigators have yet to recover the 2 murder weapons, a .380 caliber and a .22 caliber pistol, leaving crucial questions unanswered. Despite the passage of decades, the murder of Marilu Jerry remains unsolved. In 2018, a $20,000 reward was offered for information leading to a breakthrough in the case. Tragically, Marilu's father, Miguel Sado, has since passed away. However, her mother and siblings continue their quest for answers, determined to uncover the truth behind Marilu's tragic and untimely death. Monica Rizzo, a 44-year-old woman from San Antonio, Texas, was last seen alive on May 5, 1997, when she inexplicably left her government office job without a word, leaving her purse behind. She never returned for her belongings or explained her sudden departure. Concern grew as she missed work for several days, prompting her boss to make multiple attempts to contact her. After 8 days of unanswered calls, Monica finally picked up the phone at her home. She told her boss that she was unwell and would take the rest of the week off, promising to return to work the following Monday, May 19th. But Monday came and went, and Monica never showed up. Her absence was suspicious, but her husband, Leonard Rizzo, did not report her disappearance to the police. He claimed that a few days after her conversation with her boss, he woke up to find Monica gone. There was no sign of her, and Leonard appeared indifferent about the situation. This lack of concern would soon place him under intense scrutiny. On June 5th, the San Antonio police received a chilling, anonymous call. The male caller alleged that Monica had been murdered by her husband, Leonard, and that her bones could be found in their backyard. Investigators quickly arrived at the Rizzo home, only to find Leonard in the midst of an apparent seizure. As he was taken to the hospital, police questioned his son, who stated that he lived across town and had not seen Monica in over a week. Her personal belongings, including her clothes, were still in the closet, and her car remained parked in the driveway. Despite the caller's disturbing claims, investigators initially found only animal bones in the backyard. There was no immediate evidence to support the accusation that Monica had been killed and buried on the property. However, the mystery was far from over. Exactly 1 month later, on July 5, 1997, the anonymous tipster called the police again, reiterating that Monica's remains were buried in the backyard and providing a more specific location this time, under a pile of tires. Acting on the new information, police conducted another search. This time, they made a grim discovery: a skull, several bone fragments, and a plastic bag containing decomposing human flesh. Leonard Rizzo was unable to offer any plausible explanation for the gruesome find. He vehemently denied having anything to do with Monica's disappearance or the human remains found in his yard. Instead, he insisted that someone was framing him. But as the investigation unfolded, it became increasingly difficult to believe his claims of innocence. Inside the Rizzo home, police found several sections of bashed or blood-spattered drywall, suggesting a violent struggle had taken place. Leonard offered an unconvincing explanation, claiming that he was so distraught over Monica's disappearance that he had beat up the house in frustration. However, his behavior and the state of the home raised red flags for investigators. They also learned that Monica's co-workers had noticed troubling signs before her disappearance. She had been losing weight, and they often saw bruises on her arms. Concerned for her well-being, they contacted the police, requesting a welfare check. When an officer visited Monica, he observed that she had bruises on her face. Yet, when questioned about her injuries, Monica downplayed their significance, claiming she had fallen. Despite the visible signs of abuse, she assured the officer that she was fine. Leonard, for his part, adamantly denied being abusive. As suspicions around Leonard intensified, police brought in a team of archaeologists from the University of Texas to thoroughly excavate the backyard. The search yielded shocking results. Over 8 days, more than 200 bone fragments were uncovered. Scattered throughout the yard, the fragments were so numerous that orange pin flags marked each discovery, and by the end of the excavation, the entire yard was covered with them. Investigators found bones in various locations, including inside the barbecue grill. Many of the fragments were less than 3 inches long, indicating that they had been chopped into small pieces. Police theorized that a wood chipper or shredder had been used to dismember the bodies. Leonard, however, claimed that he had never operated such equipment. In a disturbing twist, forensic analysis of the bone fragments revealed that they belonged to 4 different individuals. Even more unsettling was the fact that none of the remains matched Monica's DNA profile. This discovery left investigators and the public alike grappling with more questions than answers. Who were these unidentified victims? How did their remains end up in Leonard Rizzo's backyard? And most importantly, what had happened to Monica? Leonard had no credible answers. He continued to deny any involvement in the human remains found on his property, maintaining that he was being set up by someone with malicious intent. Despite his denials, the evidence against him continued to mount. Police identified the anonymous caller as Robert Haskell, a family friend who had been at the Rizzo home when he noticed a dog playing with what appeared to be a human jawbone. The jawbone had overlapping teeth, a characteristic feature of Monica's dental structure. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Haskell contacted the police, fearing that the remains were indeed Monica's. However, Haskell was not considered a suspect in the case. Subsequent DNA testing of the remains finally confirmed what many had feared. The bone fragments and human tissue found in the backyard belonged to Monica Rizzo. Despite this breakthrough, no arrests were made in connection with her murder. The case remained in a state of limbo. In 1998, a homicide detective revealed a startling claim. Leonard allegedly stated that he would confess to Monica's murder if he could secure a 10-year probationary sentence. However, the authorities were unable to offer such a deal, and Leonard ultimately refused to confess. He later denied ever making the statement, continuing to insist that Monica was still alive somewhere. Leonard's behavior became increasingly erratic and violent. In May 1999, he was arrested after a standoff with police following an incident in which he attacked his girlfriend. During the altercation, he reportedly threatened to kill her, chop her up, put her in a garbage bag, and bury her, a chilling statement that echoed the circumstances surrounding Monica's disappearance. Leonard was convicted on 4 criminal counts, including assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, and drug possession. Despite these convictions, authorities have never been able to gather enough evidence to charge him with Monica's murder. To this day, the case remains unresolved. Leonard's continued claims of Monica being alive have only added to the mystery, leaving family members and investigators frustrated by the lack of closure. On January 3, 1972, 2 boys fishing on Taylor Bayou near Webster, Texas, made a grisly discovery when they found a human skull floating in the water. The skull was later identified as belonging to a young girl. Approximately 6 weeks later, authorities, while conducting a search in a nearby field, uncovered the rest of her remains along with the remains of another girl. Dental records revealed that the remains belonged to 14-year-old Ronda Johnson and 13-year-old Sharon Shaw, 2 teenagers who had gone missing during the summer of the previous year. Despite the identification of their remains, the exact cause of their deaths could not be determined. For months, investigators struggled to find leads in the case. But on June 9, 1972, 23-year-old gas station attendant Michael Lloyd Self was arrested and charged with their murders. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison. However, from the beginning, he adamantly maintained his innocence. Ronda and Sharon had last been seen alive on August 4, 1971, walking towards the Jericho Surf and Sea Shop in Galveston. Due to the disappearance of the girls, an investigation was soon launched, which gained significant momentum and pressure, particularly because Ronda's grandfather was a prominent city council member. The case took a dramatic turn in late May 1972 when the Webster City Council hired a new police chief, Don Morris, along with an assistant chief, Tommy Deal. Both men had previously worked for the Texas Department of Public Safety in the Traffic Division. Not long after taking charge, Chief Morris received a tip from a city councilman named Glenn Price, who suggested that Michael Lloyd Self, a known sex offender with a history of peeping Tom incidents, might be involved in the murders of Ronda and Sharon. Acting on this tip, officers Tommy Deal and Herman Morgan visited the gas station where Self worked the night shift. Deal confronted Self by mentioning that he believed Self was thinking about 2 girls, a reference to Ronda and Sharon. Confused, Self initially believed the officers were referring to his estranged wife and his new girlfriend. Later that morning, he voluntarily accompanied the officers to the police station, where he was questioned further. During the interrogation, he was shown pictures of Ronda and Sharon and acknowledged that he recognized them, but insisted that he did not know them personally. Despite this, the officers arrested him on suspicion of murder. Self later claimed that during the subsequent interrogation, officers repeatedly pressured him to confess to the crimes. According to Self, Chief Morris physically intimidated him by pushing him against the wall and poking him with a nightstick. Morris allegedly removed bullets from his gun and placed them on the table in front of Self as a form of psychological intimidation, implying that he would shoot Self if he did not cooperate. Terrified, Self eventually agreed to write a confession under the guidance of Morris, who dictated what he should write. The confession, however, did not align with the known facts of the case. In it, Self claimed to have disposed of Ronda and Sharon's bodies at El Largo, a location 20 miles away from Taylor Bayou, where their remains were actually found. He also stated that he had strangled one of the girls, yet there was no evidence to support this claim based on the condition of the remains. Furthermore, Self's confession included details that were inconsistent with witness reports and the timeline of events. For example, he claimed to have picked up the girls from Sharon's house, a statement contradicted by her family, and he mentioned that the girls were seen hollering and waving from his car, yet no witnesses corroborated this account. Despite these discrepancies, the confession was used to charge him with murder. 3 days after his initial arrest, Self underwent a polygraph test in which he once again confessed to the murders. During this second confession, he provided additional details, such as stating that he had hit the girls with a Coke bottle and disposed of their clothes by throwing them on the side of a highway. These statements conflicted with his first confession and with the evidence, as the girls' clothes were found with their remains. 2 weeks after his arrest, Self was taken out of jail by 2 sheriff's deputies under the pretext of buying him dinner. Instead, the deputies drove him to various locations mentioned in his confession and took photographs of him at these sites. These photographs were later presented in court as evidence of a third confession, although Self's attorney argued that this was a form of entrapment and that the so-called confession was coerced and illegal. While awaiting trial, investigator Dave Coburn met with Self in jail. Self confided in Coburn, describing how Morris and Deal had physically assaulted him and coerced his confession. Coburn later recalled witnessing Morris use similar intimidation tactics on another prisoner. Despite Coburn's willingness to testify on Self's behalf, he was never called to the stand during the trial. On May 15, 1973, Michael Lloyd Self was convicted of the murders of Ronda Johnson and Sharon Shaw and sentenced to life in prison. However, in a shocking twist, just 3 years later, both Morris and Deal were arrested and charged with bank robbery. It was revealed that the 2 former police officers had been part of a criminal gang responsible for a series of bank heists dating back to 1972. In 1976, Morris was sentenced to 55 years in prison, while Deal received a 30-year sentence. Although both men were eventually paroled, Deal was later rearrested for another robbery. Despite these revelations, Self's conviction remained intact. In 1980, a significant development occurred when a man walked into a police station in Taylor Lake, Texas, and confessed to the murders of Ronda and Sharon. Although the man was suffering from psychosis, he provided details that had not been made public, including the fact that he had used a cord to tie down the girls' bodies. This detail had been deliberately withheld by the police to verify the legitimacy of any future confessions. The man also had personal connections to the victims, as he lived in the same apartment complex as one of the girls. Despite the new confession and the criminal histories of Morris and Deal, Self's conviction was upheld. Over the years, Self and his attorneys continued to fight for a new trial. In 1992, he was denied parole, and on March 30, 1993, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to review his case. Throughout his time in prison, Self maintained his innocence, insisting that he had been framed by corrupt police officers. In 2000, Michael Lloyd Self died in prison without ever being exonerated. Investigators now believe that Ronda and Sharon were likely victims of an unidentified serial killer who was active in the Galveston area during the early 1970s. Authorities have linked the girls' murders to several other cases, including the deaths of Debbie Ackerman, Maria Johnson, Brooks Bracewell, and Georgia Geer. Edward Bell, a convicted murderer who killed Larry Dickens, has been named a person of interest in these cases. Bell, who died in prison in 2019, is suspected of being responsible for the murders of multiple young women in Texas. However, despite the growing belief that someone else committed the murders of Ronda and Sharon, no one has ever been officially charged in their case, leaving it unresolved to this day.